practicing the Eightfold Path can get like rote memory, maybe, if you can even vaguely remember what they are. It's not like you even have to remember them in order. And, fairly commonly we can remember things maybe like right speech and right livelihood, which is what is part of today's conversation. Sometimes it's a little harder to remember, well, what was right view and, what exactly is right intention? But I think we've been traveling along this path well enough, spending, weeks on each of the topics, that I try to remind us from time to time that, like one of the things in right intention is just remembering that there are these right thoughts, that of renunciation or letting go of what's unskillful or unwholesome, and then inclining the mind toward mindfulness, toward kindness, and toward compassion. Oh, here comes Milo's dad. Milo's dad's going to come pick him up. The door will open soon. Like almost momentarily. Well, maybe he's barking at something else that happens. So, in Joseph's book, which is where we've been using sort of the jumping off point, his reflection on right livelihood is fairly short. And we've also been using Bhante Gunaratana's book on the 8 mindful steps to happiness, because he's got a lot more detail and description. So, in general, the next step on the path that we've been talking about is right livelihood. And oftentimes we separate out our spiritual practice from our work. And the Buddha puts this part of our lives as a central place on the journey of awakening. And the work that we do as lay people, we know it can occupy more time than anything else in our lives. And it's essential that we relate to it in terms of the context of our highest aspirations. And, a lot of us are retired from what our regular work might have been for a large part of our lives, but we're all still quite actively involved in other things that it's helpful to, be reminded about these 5 points that the Buddha specifically mentions when he talks about livelihood, that he's specific. And you can kind of think about it like 2,600 years ago, when you think, what were people like then? What did they do for a living? They didn't write, they only communicated by speech. They probably didn't go very much out of their villages, except for the wandering monks who would go from village to village. And to have the Buddha approach people and say, it's not a good idea to trade in weapons and in instruments for killing. And it's not a good idea to trade human beings, buying and selling children and adults. And, this might seem kind of foreign, but we know that it goes on in many places in the world now. We're much more aware of it now, in even the local U.S. communities. But, that could even at that time, talking about children and adults, it goes for slavery, basically, buying and selling, and slave labor, and then there's avoiding livelihoods that involve meat production and the killing of animals, and manufacturing or selling of intoxicants, and or addictive drugs, producing or trading in any kind of poison. And so the Buddha talks about abstaining from any livelihood that also involves deceit. So of all these livelihoods, it seems like some of the obvious ones to avoid, because they actively cause harm to other beings. And that produces a negative karmic consequences for ourselves. And then, how can we understand that right livelihood uh, in its positive aspect? We can hold an ideal of a life of service. And then, sometimes people they feel like they haven't lived up to it, or maybe they sort of ignore cultivating this path of right livelihood, this step on the path. And so it can be subtler and more integrated as, developing whatever we do, that we try not to be of harm to ourselves or to others. And so it's not just about what we do, but it's also about how we do it. And so, some of us might be, and we've all had interactions with people who go out of their way to be of service. And, we can experience the good feelings generated by those interactions. And we've probably had the opposite experience as well, that, we're not engaged in a harmful occupation, then whatever work we do can be an arena for cultivating generosity and loving kindness. And Goenka explained it, S.N. Goenka explained it, is if the intention is to play a useful role in society in order to support oneself and to help others, then the work one does is right livelihood. And there's these implications also for like our relationship to money and to wealth. And in some traditions, money is seen as like evil or to be avoided, or something that's apart from spiritual life. But in the Buddhist teachings, wealth that's rightfully gained is seen as a blessing, and that it can be used for the benefit and welfare of others. So two of the most prominent lay people that are mentioned in the suttas, Visakha and Anapindika, the chief female and male support people of the Buddha. Visakha was the female, and Anapindika was the male supporter. And they both reached, at least it is said that they both reached stream enterer. And so they were well established on the path. And they used their wealth to support the Sangha and the spread of the Dharma, as well as taking care of those that were in need. And so right livelihood has a really broad application. And the Dalai Lama said something to the effect of, to take responsibility for others gives us the power of a radiant heart, a responsive and heroic heart. So whatever work we do can be performed with this aspiration of benefiting other beings. Even if it's just helping someone pick up something off the street when they dropped it while trying to manage their umbrella, their raincoat, and closing their car door. And this path of right livelihood, this fifth step on the path, it takes this aspiration and it puts it into practice. And if we were to look a little more at Bhante Gunaratana's book, he has some interesting reflections about finding skillful livelihood. And, sometimes people having this sinking feeling that you might recognize in your job that it doesn't fulfill this feeling of skillful livelihood, and then what should I do? And he talks about noticing uncomfortable feelings and using the tool of metta and loving kindness, and how some of the hardest hearts that we have to deal with can be won with loving friendliness. And then as you look more clearly at what you're doing, there might be a point in which you just say, this is causing me harm. And so you collect to determine how to go find other ways of livelihood so that you're not causing yourself harm in what you're doing every day. So one of the quotes in the Dhammapada is, when neither for one's own sake nor for the sake of another, one wishes not for children, wealth, a kingdom, or for prosperity gained by unjust means. Only then is one virtuous, wise, and righteous. So, sometimes people, they leave a job or they change professions, and it's an easy decision. And other times, there's more sacrifice involved as you sort of determine how is this serving me? And now, as most of us being unemployed, except probably Jasmine, we have other ways to determine if what we are doing is of service to us and of service to others, and if it might be harmful to us, we just look at that. And there's lots of ways of letting what we've accumulated be put toward sanghas, toward monasteries, toward ways of supporting those that are continuing the Dhamma. So we have sort of a different way of defining, what livelihood is for us after we've gotten out of our American way of retiring at a certain age. And, what do you do then with the rest of your time? But knowing this path of right livelihood, for me, I think I was lucky enough always to choose, in the early days as being an artist, I didn't have to involve myself in anything that was going to harm others, really. And developing massage therapy, I was able to be of service. And I kind of steered free of most of what I would wonder if I thought about it later after learning the steps of the Eightfold Path. Well, I think I had really good karma. I've had really good karma in this lifetime to have work where I didn't have to think too hard about whether anyone was being harmed by what I was doing. So if I can find the place. Well, one of the other things that Bhante Gunaratana talks about is mindfulness of skillful livelihood. So sometimes people have to accept a job situation, and as an aspect of spiritual practice, it's not easy. Some people sort of box off their work from their spiritual life, and then when you sit down to meditate and review past actions, then there has to be this acknowledgement that some of the things that a person might be doing at their jobs are their own actions, and even if they're instigated by a boss or required as part of the job, there are times when lying is still lying, and sometimes people get paid to do it, and there's a lot that goes on in looking at right livelihood. So, and then as with skillful speech and skillful action, the other two in this grouping, skillful livelihood requires that we always purify our behavior, whether it's at home or on the job, so we can have this reminder of the practices for the purification of the mind, and we use our own intuition as best we can to do the kind of work that we choose to do to not harm ourselves and not harm others. So that's probably enough being said, unless I kind of went to at the back of that chapter of his on right livelihood, he has key points This is Bhante Gunaratana. He has key points to remember concerning mindfulness of skillful livelihood. Our means of sustenance should not interfere with our spiritual development. We can assess whether a job qualifies as skillful livelihood by means of a 3-tiered inquiry. The first level of inquiry, we examine whether a job is inherently harmful to ourselves or others. The second level, we consider whether a job causes us to break any of the 5 precepts. And then we ask ourselves other factors related to the job. Are there other factors that make it difficult for the mind to settle down? And that's kind of a big one. Oftentimes we don't even notice that the mind just can't settle down in the work that's happening. So,
will you say that again, Kendall?
We ask whether other factors related to the job make it difficult for the mind to settle down. So there might be other factors of what a boss might ask us to do, or something that we have to do that we're continually doing, and the mind is not settling down. And he also points to using loving friendliness to improve a difficult job situation. But as long as you lack harmful intentions, then your mind isn't harmed by a job's adverse consequences. So it's around the intention that the person has while working, that if the intention is not to cause harm, then that can balance any adverse consequences from someone who has to stay in the job that they're staying in if it's a difficult situation. Hang on, Margaret, let me say one more thing and then I'll just stop. The last one is skillful livelihood is a goal to be sought gradually as our spiritual practice matures. So it's a long process with right livelihood. But go ahead, Margaret, what do you want to say?
Yeah, it's interesting how somewhat complex it can be at times. I had a job, I remember, as a receptionist for a religious organization, and it required a lot of multitasking at times, and I think that I did a pretty good job of it, but pretty good. People liked me and wanted to see me, and I had lots of friends, but the position itself was so taxing at times that I kept it for long enough, and then I realized that I couldn't calm my mind, calm my heart to a very great extent. It took a lot out of me.
Mm-hmm.
Although I felt like I was skillful in what I was doing throughout the day, as skillful as I could be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Walked away feeling proud and like I made lots of friends and so on. I wouldn't choose to do that much in the way of multitasking again. I'd have to say.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just interesting.
Yeah. One of the things that Bhante Gunaratana observed in part of that chapter was that, he said this: if we wish to progress more quickly, we can seek employment that nurtures our practice and propels us along more quickly. Such a job presents situations that challenge our weak areas in a way that strengthens them without being overwhelming. And it avoids presenting us with problems we're not currently prepared to deal with. For example, someone trying to cultivate refined, sublime states of concentration may be best served by a job that provides easy, routine work that doesn't overly excite the mind.
That's right. That's right. Because I was able to get into very deep concentration when I was working full time at one point. But it was repetitive. A lot of it was what some people would consider tedious, but I found that when I went to work and I did my work, I had a very bright
Mm-hmm.
feeling in my heart
Mm-hmm.
because my practice was very good and
Yeah.
strong,
Yeah.
and I was able to keep my practice strong. So that's interesting how he put it.
Yeah. And he even makes the suggestion that someone might deliberately, if you're deliberately cultivating patience, then you might flourish in a job that requires working with challenging situations and difficult people.
Yeah.
Because you're developing patience, cultivating patience.
Blossoming that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
That's what you're doing, Doug. Developing patience. That's probably what you did, Mike, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other comments about right livelihood for yourself or